Okay, it's 11 o'clock. Welcome everyone to our podcasting at the Marriott Library. This is by Robert Nelson. We're super excited. Aaron Mendoza is going to give some introductions.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Can everyone hear me okay? We need to take that as yes. Okay. So this morning we have Robert J. Nelson from the University of Utah. Robert has a Master's of Library and Information Science from BYU University, and he's here to talk to us about podcasting today.
Greetings, everyone. As you heard, I'm Robert Nelson, and what I'm going to present today is basically I made up a WordPress site that's going to present information for an article that I currently have under peer review with college and undergraduate libraries that's called Podcasting in Academic Libraries, but I'm calling this session Podcasting at the Marriott Library. And so who I am, I'm head of Media Studios at the Marriott Library, and Media Studios is a professional audio studio, a professional video studio, and a student-scheduled one-button studio, which is a sort of plug in a flash drive, the camera starts recording, stop the button, and it takes your file. And so my other main responsibility is what's called Audio Projects Librarian. And so what that means is I am responsible for the day-to-day management of what goes on in the audio studio. So the audio studio is in our faculty center, which is housed along with the video studio, Teaching and Learning Technologies, which does course development, and Centers for Teaching and Learning Excellence. They help professors upgrade their coursework. The audio studio itself is a professional soundproof studio that was created for this purpose of primarily helping faculty members engaged in research. And what that means is primarily they had the ability to do focus groups using professional audio microphones in a soundproof space with professional audio equipment. We use Adobe Audition to record on, and university students have access to that through the Creative Cloud. And so I was put there because I'm also the host of KRCL, Salt Lake City's local community radio station. I do their Saturday afternoon reggae radio show called Smile Jamaica. Here's the little logo. You can see it's a little Bob Marley 45 that I have out of my collection. So October 1st is 31 years for me doing that show. And also between the years of 2003 and 2012, I hosted their radioactive political interview program. And I mention this because when the Marriott Library was going through a renovation for earthquake proofing back in the mid-2000s, they were forward thinking to try and embrace emerging technologies such as media production. So the space where the audio and video studio is used to be the Marriott Library's computer lab. And what they told me at the time in 2008, I was an education librarian. I was managing the library's student textbooks for K through 12 on behalf of the School of Education, and said, well, you've got all this radio experience. Guess what? We're gonna toss you in, and now you're gonna be in charge of audio. And they said, here's your space, here's your equipment, now make something out of it. And so for the past decade, that's exactly what I have endeavored to do. And so one of my specialty interests is podcasting. So what I want to try and do today with my talk is to do a few things. I'm going to talk about what is podcasting, the definition, and what my personal experience is. I've actually been podcasting before there was a word for it. I'm going to talk about podcasting demographics, who's out there listening to podcasts, and why that's important for us as educators and librarians, and how to engage oral history in the classroom through podcasts and digital stories. Then I'm going to talk about podcasting that takes place in the audio studio within the Marriott Library. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how COVID-19 has impacted my work and access and podcasts. And then at the end, I'll leave a little room for questions. So my mom asked me, like about a year ago, so what is podcasting? By the way, this is the audio studio. So you can see here, we've got the ability, these are all professional microphones. The control booth is back here. That's where I record the session. And so people would usually just come in, sit down. I mic them up, as they say, so I get their mics the way they want it. I do a mic check to make sure that the audio levels are to my desire. I hit start, and then we record. So my mom asked me, what is podcasting? Well, the Guardian newspaper out of England, this guy named Ben Hammersley, all the way back in 2004, wrote this article. With the benefit of hindsight, it all seems quite obvious. MP3 players like Apple's iPod in many pockets, audio production software cheap or free, and web blogging an established part of the internet. All the ingredients are there for a new boom in what he was calling amateur radio. But what to call it? Audio blogging, podcasting, guerrilla media? Well, this would be my personal definition. A mashup of the iPod, if you look, if you look at my, my little thing here, I'm holding up my old iPod. You probably have one of these in a drawer somewhere. And the thing I thought was, wow, I can't believe these things were so heavy, compared to my iPhone. So it's a mashup of the iPod, which was, of course, Apple's pre-smartphone digital music player, plus casting, as in radio and television, they broadcast. So pod plus casting, podcasting. Although that title is a misnomer because podcasts are streamed rather than broadcast. Broadcast means it goes out over either radio waves or television waves. So the Oxford English Dictionary definition, a digital audio file, MP3, made available on the internet for downloading, usually off of a podcast site such as Spotify. That seems to be the most popular one. They're really investing millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in becoming the de facto podcast place for people to go. iTunes is another place, SoundCloud. I use a podcast site for radio and club DJs called Mixcloud. So that's how you get a hold of it off the internet. Typically available as a series. So in my case, I have a Saturday afternoon show. And so what I do is I upload last week's show Friday before. So before I came into work today, I uploaded my program to Mixcloud for Smile Jamaica. I give it tags. I have subscribers. I think I have like 850 subscribers. And since I've been managing this podcast, the total minutes streamed are almost 2.4 million minutes streamed. So all of those subscribers get a message from me as soon as I upload a new show. And then various tags means that anybody who's searching for things like reggae, vinyl, things like that, they can find it as well. And then I don't do Facebook, but I do Twitter. So I will usually then send out another message through Twitter. So that's what I mean by the new installments of which can be received by subscribers automatically. So my experience in what I'm calling pre-podcasting digital archives. So around 2001, KRCL gave the ability for radio DJs to upload archived editions of their programs onto KRCL web pages. And so what I would do is I would go into a production studio. I would record the show there using Audition. I would trim the beginnings and ends, and then I would simply upload the MP3 to my Smile Jamaica space on KRCL's page. People could stream it or they could download it. And then I would promote it through my personal email contacts. And if anybody out here has been around as long as you might remember in the early 90s, before we had like Facebook, MySpace, Twitter, things like that, what constituted social media was something called the Usenet discussion groups. And what this was, it was a text-based sort of a place for computer programmers and university people that had access to be able to have discussions based around a hierarchy of interests. And so in my case, because I was a reggae music fanatic, mine was rec for recreation, music, and reggae. And I would just literally send links to the Smile Jamaica page. I had friends from places like Sweden, Japan, all over the United States, a lot of places, Germany, England, even Saudi Arabia. And sometimes I'd even send them either cassette tapes of Smile Jamaica and then went to CDRs. But once we were able to just upload MP3s, it was just totally ready for anyone to consume. So I did that and was really happy with it up until around 2005, when a new piece of legislation came in that shut us all down. And that was the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which required KRCL to shut down these streams. So back in 2005, there was really no commercial environment for digital radio programs like what I was doing, what we would call podcasts, from pretty much 2004 on. And the DMCA criminalizes the act of circumventing an access control, which in my case was recording music and uploading it without copyright clearance, whether or not there is an actual infringement of copyright itself. And it heightens the penalties for that infringement. So of course, KRCL being a sort of a bubblegum and baling wire organization, there was no way they were going to put themselves at legal exposure for copyright infringement. So what that meant was you could no longer do, like I could no longer do like 3 hours of Bob Marley, or you can only play, I could no longer play like 1/2 off of a vinyl record that was out of print or something. And so what happened was that it just kind of left me hanging for a while, waiting basically for what I was calling digital radio archives. And these are my insights. So if you see this picture, this is what 40 years of record collecting looks like. This is my, my personal archive in my house. So what is the goal? For me, it was how to get listeners worldwide to consume Smile Jamaica, because that's what you're doing, you're consuming media. If they don't live in northern Utah, to hear the show broadcast live on terrestrial radio. And those issues are the exact same for modern podcasters. On-demand media democratization, podcasts are usually free. Digital media utility, listeners can listen on their time, not my time. You no longer had to be sitting by your radio Saturday at 4 o'clock in northern Utah to be able to listen to Smile Jamaica. You could listen again and again. You could listen to other shows. You could listen every week. You could take it on the car with you, whatever it is you want to do. And in my case, I was marketing to a target audience. Why Smile Jamaica? Well, it's a music archive for reggae music collectors and obsessives. I only play vinyl or CD. I don't play digital. And the other main difference between podcasts and your iTunes and Pandora and stuff like that is there's a storytelling imperative. You don't get stories on your iTunes Music or Pandora, Prime, those sorts of things. So I host my show on Mixcloud, and this is, you know, like, it's pretty popular. You can see this, if you see this, it's this was me being #1 for the week in the dub music charts on May 16th. And so for me, it's been a really great way to expand my audience to the world. And so I average about 120 listeners a week and cumulatively have collected over 2 million minutes. And so it goes way beyond localism with what radio is today. So now that I've kind of walked you through the sort of whole idea behind why podcasting and all of that, let's talk about the demographics and why this all matters. So yeah, it's all fine and good that guys like me, my avocation has become my vocation, but you know that's fine if you're just doing a hobby program. But what about we as educators and librarians? Well, let's talk next about podcasting demographics. This is a great resource. It's called The Infinite Dial, and it's published by Edison Research. And what this is this is the place to go if you want to know how many people have TikTok accounts, how many people dropped their Facebook accounts last year, how many people own Amazon Alexa. All that is in really nice graphical form, and they track it year over year after year. And so with what I call digital radio archives, what most people are calling podcasting, they are calling monthly online audio listening. So obviously this would include podcasts and any other sort of online sources that people are listening to. And so I just copied in the last 3 years of data here. And you can see in the age ranges between 12 and 34, almost 9 in 10 listen to at least one podcast a month. 35 to 54, it's up to 3/4. And 55 and up, it's beyond this third and trending to up on its way to half of the people. And so if you look at especially the third, this number is incredible, which goes to show you that young people are podcast preferred. I imagine more people listen to me in this age range on KRCL's app than they do the 90.9 radio broadcast signal. But this is pretty incredible too. If you look in 2018 for the 35 to 54-year-olds, and it's gone up almost 10%, especially in a hyper-competitive new media, multimedia environment. Anytime you can get 10% growth over 2 years, that's incredible. And same here. So in the ages of 12 to 35, that's your junior high through graduate students, probably a lot of your new professors, because 9 out of 10 almost are already listening. They're very receptive to digital instruction. 35 to 54, they're more interested in showcasing a professional outcomes. They're receptive to things like marketing, academia, journalism, their own professional development, continuing education potential of podcasting. I have many podcast groups that I work with that are faculty that are doing this to showcase their research. Things like, and it isn't just people in the humanities. I work with the global surgeons at the U of U Medical School. I work with this group called Child NeuroChat. They're child neurologists and nurses dealing with children's epilepsy. And they're all podcast fanatics themselves, and they all want to become podcast producers to share their works. And it was incredible when we started with the nurses. It was like they had gone the whole way. They had signed up for professional podcast site. I think they use something called Podbean, and it gives them like statistics of who's listening. It gives them like where people are listening. And it was just amazing every week when they would come in, how excited they were to see how many downloads they had from the week before. So this is a way to ingratiate people with maybe audiences that normally wouldn't read an academic journal, but maybe they have an interest. My dad has a rare brain condition, and when we were driving him from Arizona to Montana, we listened to podcasts on his neurological condition. And so people are using podcasts, in this case, 55 and above. It can be for all the same reasons of anything prior, but a lot of it is personal engagement, in our case, continuing education. So that's the podcast environment. So now let's talk a little bit about oral history. So this article was written by a history teacher from North Carolina, the University of North Carolina. I think it came out originally in 2001, 2002, before podcast was a word. So she's calling it oral history. I would call it digital storytelling in the classroom. And so she talks about the 7 hallmarks of oral history and enhanced student learning outcomes. And this is where podcasting becomes more than just a hobby or just something to sponge up time. So these 7 hallmarks are kind of my little guidepost when I teach podcasting as a guest lecturer in courses, or if I work with professors who want to incorporate podcasts into their instruction. Oral history can help students learn new historical content. It's a lot better to hear something about, I guess, the dead white guys than it is to read about it in your history textbook. Oral history can help students learn research skills. As librarians, that's super important for us. Oral history can support good writing skills, which is also very important to both librarians and instructors. Oral history can teach students valuable critical thinking skills. That's something that sometimes gets short shrift in instruction activities. What are we doing with teaching kids? We're teaching them, right, how to think for themselves instead of, and analyze things critically instead of just regurgitating what it is they've read or listened to. Oral history can help all students feel included. A lot of people who don't feel like they're very good writers might feel that they can be better engaged if they're able to do something in a creative media fashion. Oral history can help students feel a personal connection to the past and to the life of their community. And that's one of the goals of the University of Utah, right? To turn out well-rounded, well-educated citizens that will take their insights into the world and make everything a better place. And oral history can help students develop valuable interpersonal skills, which comes about through self-confidence in being able to do a podcast, to be able to write out what it is you want to do a script, to write out your questions. And when I do podcast instruction, I show a LibGuide that I have based on my 9 years of interviews on KRCL that I call How to Interview, Bad Habits and Best Practices. And what that is I teach students how to write their questions, how to take their personal bias out. All questions in a podcast should start with one of these words: who, what, when, where, why, or how. And the reason for that is those questions cannot be answered with a yes or no. So you're asking a question and you're wanting to hear what the response is, rather than doing a leading question like saying, well, do you think, X, Y, Z? In this case, it makes for better training of students to be able to do interviews, especially those going into doing things, graduate coursework, where they may be required to conduct interviews as a part of that. So her research showed, Miss Catherine Warlbert, who I just love this article, and it's very hard to find, unfortunately. There's an explosive growth of on-demand media offerings and consumption. So I don't know how many of you out there are podcast fanatics like I am, but Spotify just gave the #1 podcaster in the world, Joe Rogan, $100 million to bring his podcast to Spotify. So that tells you just how explosive the demand is for this sort of media offering. People are 8 out of 10, 8.5, almost 9 out of 10, under 35, 3/4 more or less over 35. So they're already listening and they're ravenous for things that they can be educated while they're entertained. So it's also oral history, or I'm just going to switch to a podcast. They're a target-rich environment for digital education content. And right now, with everybody being locked down, that's exactly what we need. So by being able to do podcasts when people can't come in and do a writing session as a class, digital education is basically how we're all doing it right now until we can return to normal. It increases class participation, especially amongst ESL students. And I've noticed this particularly. We have a high Asian student population at the U of U, and oftentimes they're very reticent to speak up in class. And so when I am a guest lecturer, and when I guest lecture, I always like to ask for 3 sessions The first session is I talk about podcasting. I show some of my LibGuides. We go into the audio studio. I show people how it all works. The second session is for class time to come in to record their podcasts with me in the studio. Then we go back, and we used to have a little Mac classroom, right, embedded in the faculty center where the audio studio is. And I would show them how to edit their podcast, how to add music, how to do fades, how to cut edits, how to do all of that. And then the third class, we listen to the podcast, and then I give my sort of critique on, where I think, they did great, where I think they might be able to improve. And the thing that I've noticed a lot is that some of the best crafted and most creative of these podcasts are coming about through ESL students. And they don't always feel comfortable. They apologize for their English, even though when I look at some ESL students' writing, it's oftentimes superior to native-born students. But anyway, I've noticed especially that the ESL students really take a shine in the podcast sessions that I teach. It also helped, the professional research also shows that it increases critical reflection and increases media literacy. And so those are all important skills that people can leverage once they're done with whatever oral history class that they happen to be taking. But the key to this is, well, everybody thinks, term papers means you have to write a 20-page paper and have a dozen, references or whatever. And so the other thing that I'm starting to see in a lot of the classes that I liaise with is that professors are either assigning podcasts as an assignment, they're accepting a podcast in lieu of a term paper. Maybe you don't want to do a term paper. Maybe your professor will let you do a podcast. And oftentimes as well, they will give extra credit if people want to do podcasts. So a lot of the student work that I do now is to record podcasts for class assignments. And I absolutely love it because I'm the engineer doing the recording, and I'm literally actively listening to what they're saying. And I have learned so much about young people just by what they talk about in their podcasts. So for me, it's truly an enjoyable experience to share my pre-podcast 20 plus years of experience, to teach people media editing that is very seldom taught formally in any classes outside of maybe comm or film and media arts. And so for me, that increase in media literacy is how you match up podcast consumers to podcast creators. And what has happened is that when I work with these students, we sit down, have a dialogue, I show them how to edit, I show them how I'm recording, how to set up microphones, I teach them how to speak. That sounds funny, but there's a real skill in speaking, and that's why I have students and staff. I usually like them to stand because you get a better sound quality rather than when you're sitting. And so what they do is they want to come back and do more podcasts outside of their coursework. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how that works in a minute or two. So a lot of professors, if you're led to believe, hey, they got to have a term paper, they're not good good writers. Well, maybe not. So in Miss Warlbert's article, The 7 Hallmarks of Oral History, these were the described outcomes. So these were the research, and then here were the outcomes. The digital format assignments were well received by the students. So right off the bat, they liked doing it. There was no grumbling about 20-page paper and making sure, all you're running it through, turn it in, all that. And the educators' learning objectives were met. All of these above things here. There was a noticeable increase in literacy skills and a high level of student enthusiasm and satisfaction. So it makes for much better course participation, engagement, and outcomes at the end by doing a podcast. So I've walked you through my personal experience, what podcasting is, why it's important, who's out there consuming and listening to podcasts. Now let's talk about podcasting at the Marriott Library. So this is a student. He's doing an engineering session for a group of podcasters out in the main room. So how do people podcast at the Marriott Library? Well, what I'm calling project intake, people want to do a podcast. They either discover me through the Audio Studio's webpage. I have several LibGuides devoted to the basically Audio Studio podcasting, and a new one, podcasting from home. And my department, which is called Creativity and Innovation Service, which is basically all the makerspace groups, AR, VR, machine learning, 3D printing, fine arts, GIS, and audio and video production. So we have a blog, and I'll usually get assigned a couple blog posts every semester, and we talk about things of importance going on in the audio studio. I also get podcast interest through me being a guest lecturer. So I do these for a variety of different groups, primarily in humanities and social sciences, English, history, comm. I mean, so all of these are sorts of ways that people, they come in, they usually I only get the one episode or the one class time, but I always try to ask for 2 or 3, just so that, I can kind of be engaged in it as people come back to me individually to record their podcasts. But the most, the biggest way I get for podcasts, word of mouth. People that I worked with, they say, "Oh, you helped my colleague in global surgery, and I'm in dentistry. We want to do a podcast. How do I do that?" And so they get a hold of me. We usually sit down together. I bring them into the studio, show them everything. I'll usually show them my podcast site, which gives them an idea of kind of how to go from production to publication in this case. We talk about what it is they want to do. In most cases, I will record their podcast and give it to them through Ubox or Google Drive or Dropbox, one of those. A lot of people, they already know how to cut up sound, so they don't need me to edit their podcasts. They just want the quality recording. And the main reason why these individuals come to me is because if any of you have tried to do podcasts yourself at home, they pretty much sound like crap. And so what people say to me is like, "Man, I tried to do this from home. I got a little USB microphone, and the dog barks and the baby cries, and I can hear the air conditioner. And it's like, my slides look great, but I just can't get my audio the way we want." And I bring them into the audio studio, and I asked everyone just to be quiet for a second. And it's eerie how dead the room is. The lights don't emit noise. We have double what are called bank vault doors. The insulation on the walls is soundproof. Sound doesn't come out of the air returns, and the lights don't emit sound either. I've had faculty members who suffer from migraines come into this space just to turn the lights off and be in a total room where there's nothing going on. So the end result is do it from home isn't very good. Do it in the audio studio and it's professional quality. And part of that is the space, but it's also partly my experience in recording sound and editing sound for over 20 years. But sometimes people, they don't have time for that. So depending on what it is, I'll offer to edit their podcast. The child neuro chat people I told you about, I'm just a part of their team. So they went the full 9 yards and licensed intro music. They have me do their disclaimer at the end. And it's absolutely something that you might hear Ira Glass do on NPR. So the other thing is what we did, and I want to be quick on this, is that my partner is a guy named Tony Sams at the time, he was doing video. So I did audio, Tony did video. But in order to get into the video and audio studios, you had to basically be there when we were there to undertake your project. And so we said, look, we're creativity and innovation. Innovation doesn't just occur between the hours of Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. So is there any way that we could allow a way for trained and vetted users to come in and use these studios, especially faculty members, because they want to do podcasts, but oftentimes they can't get over here to the library 9 to 5. They want to do that stuff on the evenings and weekends when they don't have, like, you know, courses to teach or meetings to go through or all of that. And so what we did is I chaired a task force that was called the After Hours Task Force that was approved and allowed for unmediated access for approved students, staff, and faculty. They received training on how to use all the equipment. They had to agree to certain behavioral expectations. If they were going to be in a staff space on evenings and weekends, they had to agree that they wouldn't, vandalize or rifle through anybody's cubes that are else out in the faculty center, that they would agree to clean up after themselves. They were responsible for any guests that come in. And the fail-safe for that is that we have security cameras in each studio that monitors that. We've been doing this now for 2.5 years. We've only had one incident that I would consider to be something that there was some damage to a camera, and it could have been accidental, but we were able to fix that. And when I gave a presentation for a group of media centers that was held in Salt Lake City, and we talked about unmediated access. So what this means is that students, staff, and faculty, when they're approved, their U card allows them to tap in to the studio. It opens the door, and they can come in, do their thing. I schedule them, with a weekly or bi-weekly schedule, so we know who is in there. Our security people know who comes in and out based on the tap card information. And so since we've been doing this, last year I had 27 staff and faculty doing this and 16 students. And many of them are like Student Broadcast Council, the Daily Utah Chronicle, KUT Radio. So 43 entities were coming in regularly, semi-regularly, 7 days a week, all the hours that the library was open. It's been the greatest success of the service that I provide because it allows others to use a professional space and gain experience beyond my ability to intercede on behalf of their media project. And so what happened during COVID? Well, guess what? It all got shut down. So the earthquake was the last day that we were pretty much able to come into the building. The Marriott Library was physically closed until basically August 17th. I am on campus 2.5 days a week to be able to record people, and then I work remotely the rest of the time. And I had to get special permission from my associate dean just to do that. So the results of this, once fall semester took place, is unmediated access has been suspended. No more people coming and going. Media studios personnel, that's usually me, I act as sound engineer to ensure social distancing and proper PPE. Before every recording, I wipe down all the touch surfaces coming into the space, the table, the microphones. And so this was decided by Marriott Library groups. So in order to podcast in the audio studio, one microphone recording, the person doesn't have to wear a mask while they speak into the mic, and then I place a disposable microphone cover on the mask. But 2 or more mic recordings, they all have to wear masks, be 6 feet apart with the disposable microphone covering. Well, I don't know if any of you have been in meetings with people talking in masks. That's horrible, horrible, horrible audio. And part of it, as I've noticed, is that if I can't see people's lips moving, I'm not always sure I can hear what they're even saying. And then basically, because the two microphone recording it would be a waste of time. We have the potential of one person in the studio and one by phone. We're upgrading our analog phone to a digital phone with some of the CARES money that the library got. And so we're hoping to improve that phone recording. Well, out of those 43 people last year, I would say half a dozen asked me, when could we go back to podcasting? I sent them the new rules, and not a single one has returned to podcast. So I have gone from 43 weekly to nothing. And it's really discouraging, but it is what it is. And so what we've done to try and mitigate that, and part of that is that the University of Utah is totally deserted. I counted one day, I was walking from the student union to my car, I counted 5 people when normally there should be hundreds in my walkway. So there's hardly anybody on campus. And I think everybody has gotten into the routine of working from home. And so maybe they've just adapted. Maybe they'll sacrifice a little in audio quality to not expose themselves to possible risk. And what we've done to try and facilitate that is we have purchased podcasting kits, which is a USB snowball microphone and a case that it goes in. And that's a better microphone, but it isn't as good as the professional audio mics that I have. And staff and faculty can check those out for 3 days, and students can have them for 30 days. The University of Utah is about to go through something called a circuit breaker, where we're taking 2 weeks off and the library is going to be completely shut. So I wouldn't even be able to get into the library, even if I wanted to. So we're hoping that maybe the people that feel inconvenienced will avail themselves of the podcast kits. But I have gone from juggling scheduling for 43 people to having nothing to do. And so that is my presentation. And in the 5 or 10 minutes we have left, if there are any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. If you don't have questions for me now and you'd like to email me, I'm robert.nelson@utah.edu. So thank you for listening. And if anybody has any questions, I'll be glad to stay on and answer them.
Well, thank you, Robert. That was super interesting and really informative, and it gave me a lot of ideas.
Good.
So if you have questions or comments, will you go ahead and type them in the chat, and then I can read them to Robert. I can kick it off. I have a question. Have you had any students that you've helped with their podcasts where that podcast has become like really popular or has really taken off in the community?
I know that I worked with a group of they're English doctoral students, and there were 6 of them, and they did rather voluminous podcasts on a variety of different topics, and they uploaded all of their class sites to Spotify as a class. And so, I don't always get to hear the outcomes. It's like I get to help them make the dinner, I guess, but I'm not always there to watch people eat it. So, but what I have done has been a resource for people who want to do podcasts outside of their coursework. So a lot of people will say, hey, I came back, I was in a class and I work in environmental humanities, and now we want to do a podcast for our department. So famous, I'm not so sure, but a lot of these student projects get leveraged into things where they're working in a variety of different departments. And what university departments do for podcasting is they're primarily doing marketing. So let's say, and this is in all levels of fields. So I worked with people in, I think it was biodiversity, and they had a famous guest lecturer who was coming, and they wanted to pre-interview that person by phone so that they could share that podcast with people that would spur interest for them to come and see the person when they were here live. So a lot of groups will use podcasting for marketing. I'm about to start up a new podcast with the Dean of Architecture, and what he wants to do is showcase his faculty's article publications and research. So in that way, I think that podcasts are being used for marketing and professional development internally and externally. So I hope that answers your question somewhat.
Thank you. Here's a question from Cindy Breitenberg. What if I have a terrible voice? I often like podcasts because I like the host's voice. So what does someone do when they're interested in creating a podcast, but they don't feel confident about their voice, they just don't even like it?
Well, if you don't like your voice, then you need to get a hold of somebody like me who will do it for you. And I don't always do people's podcasts, although I have been a podcast interviewer where I ask the person the question and then they answer. And so the closest thing I can think of is just if you don't feel comfortable, why is it that you don't feel comfortable? Everybody says they don't like their voice. But the idea behind podcasts and why they're so popular is this is the common everyday person's perspective. Okay, you don't have to be working for NPR to podcast. You don't have to have a comm degree to podcast. And most importantly of all, you don't have to have a radio license. When I started in radio in the 80s, I had to get a broadcast license from the FCC. So you don't have to do that anymore. And in my take on that, if you're unhappy with the sound of your voice, most people, that's not what they're going to concentrate on. They want to hear a real person tell a story. And so, you could get someone like me with a radio voice, and people have done that. I did the narration for Utah Poison Control on a naloxone narrative tutorial that they did, because none of them wanted to do it. And so it's like, well, as long as I know I'm pronouncing things right, I'll do it for you. But Cindy, if you want to do that, we could probably work, and I could give you tips on how to improve your podcast. And the main one that most people do is ands and ums, where you're like, you hear this a lot on athletes do that a lot. They'll say, and and what that is that's a placeholder, because you think when you're talking that silence is bad. So you do the and as a way to fill that gap of silence. And when I'm doing these professionally for somebody, I take all those out. I can edit sound to the level that I can take out all the ands and ums, and it sounds like you didn't make a mistake the whole way. But if you'd like to work with me, I could give you tips and pointers and critical feedback on a podcast for you. It's very easy to just send me your MP3, and I'll listen to it and see what I think. A lot of times, too, people send me their podcast because of the bad audio quality. And so there's a lot of things you can do to improve your audio quality if you're using a poor microphone. But oftentimes in that case, it's just better to record it over again using a better microphone like the Snowball. It's on a tripod. It's multi-directional, so two people can pick up sound in a 360 instead of like each person needing their own mic. And if you are podcasting from home, my advice is hang a blanket over any windows, turn off your air conditioner, don't put the dog outside, try to move away from things like where you can hear cars and your air return or air conditioners, and so if you can minimize as much noise bleed, that means you have less problems in editing. So yeah, great question.
I have a question. When you say you can cut out the ums,
Uh-huh.
when I've had trouble when a sentence uh, gets slurred into that you have a technique where you can cut that off from that last word?
So you do need a little gap, but what you can do is, I use Audition as a recorder, but I use their free site called Audacity as an editor. Audition is kind of like for professionals, and it can be very confusing if you're not familiar with it. And I find it to be not as ideal to teach Audition to edit on. And so I use Audacity. And Audacity is something that you can download for free. It's audacity.org. And what you can do is you can stretch the sound file to where you can see that little gap where that is, snip it out, and it takes it out, and it matches the audio that comes after. So in a lot of times, if you overcut the audio, it sounds choppy and awkward. But I just said myself. But I help people do that, and if I'm doing it for, like when I was recording this naloxone for opioid overdose, that's exactly what I did. I edited my own voice and took out anything that I didn't like. The inhalation, when you over inhale. That's why for at least short audio projects, I prefer people to stand. So if you're asking me to record an audio narration for a PowerPoint, I will ask you to stand, because when you sit, your diaphragm's compressed and you over inhale. And so if you want to send me an example, I can show you how I do that from the original that you send me as an MP3 and how I would edit it. But you have to basically, you use the software to be able to stretch that file, because if you've ever seen an audio file, it's called a waveform, and it's based on amplification. And it looks like a bunch of squiggles. So the larger the squiggles, the louder the sound. But all that information, if you stretch it out, has little micro bits of information in between. And that's where usually I will know exactly what an looks like. I read audio files like a non-Latin language. I know exactly what I'm looking for. I know where the silence is. I know where the gap, where it's too loud. I know if, if people are laughing, how to take that down. Because most people have normal conversation and then they might laugh, and that could overwhelm the microphone. And you get what's called a clip, which is too loud for your listening. And since most people consume podcasts on earphones, people just won't listen to a poor quality podcast because there's so many other ones out there. So the goal is to get your audio really shined so that people think, hey, this is just as good as what I hear on NPR. So yeah, I can show you how to do that. And you send me a file, and I'll listen to where I hear the ums, the ands, the ums, the pauses, the over inhalations. Those are the main things. And I can snip them out and kind of show you how I do that.
That's cool. Okay, we only have a couple of minutes. Here's a question from Aaron Mendoza. Robert, can you explain why some people record in closets at home?
Well, the reason why they're doing it in their closet is because they're getting sound bleed from somewhere else in their house or apartment. That's why you're doing that. And that's why I suggest if your closet isn't big enough, find a room with your smallest window, hang a thick blanket or bedspread over that window, turn off the air vents in the room. If you can, turn off the lights. If you're able to just, use ambient lighting from a phone or something like that. But that's why people are doing it in their closets, because that's the room that doesn't have that's the room that has the least amount of sound bleed. And that's why I get a lot. That's why I would say most of the faculty groups I've worked with, they tried this from home, and it didn't, it's like the nurses. We've tried this from home and we listen to it, we hate it, it doesn't sound like what we listen to on Spotify. Well, now they come in, work with me, and they're like super happy with the result. And I miss them because they're great. They're dealing with child epilepsy. And so I miss a lot of what I'm doing. It's very lonely right now, you know? So, and I learn from my lifelong learning as a podcast consumer myself, and I'm in this 55 and up. So I'm in that 42% range of people that love listening to podcasts. So, but that's why people do it in their closet.
Okay, thank you so much. And
Thank you.
boy, we're really lucky to have an expert in our ranks. So if you have any more
Yes.
questions for Robert, just email him. Our lunch speaker is at noon. It's Catherine Coles. Also, our 2020 ULA Award winners will be announced. If you come back here to the technical track at 1:30, we'll have our cataloging archival materials session, part 1. We'll have a little break, and at 2:45, we'll have part 2. So enjoy your lunch.
Hey, thank you, everybody. And robert.nelson@utah.edu. I'd love to share my 25 plus years working with podcasts. Thank you.